anything else, let us begin with the sign of the cross, remembering our baptism as always. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Well, please subscribe, click on the like button, notifications button, all that good stuff, and please share this video also. So in our time, one of the most subtle yet devastating crises is not merely moral but intellectual. So we need the resurgence of reason. It is a crisis concerning reason itself, its scope, its authority, and its relationship to truth. Increasingly, reason is either reduced to mere calculation or subordinated to subjective experience. As a result, truth becomes fragmented, it becomes like an opinion. Theology becomes unstable, and even within the church, confusion begins to take root. So today we're going to discuss the work of Dr. Edward Echeverria, and this stands as a response to this crisis, of course. It is not simply a philosophical treatise, but a call to recover the authentic meaning of reason, one that is open to truth, grounded in the reality, and ordered ultimately to God. What is at stake is not merely academic clarity, but the very possibility of proclaiming the gospel with conviction and clarity, of course. Well, first of all, thanks for coming on, Dr. Edward Echeverria.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Always a pleasure.
And if I could just say really quickly about you, STL. I mean, you have your STL from Amsterdam. You have
No, I have my PhD from Amsterdam
PhD
and,
from Amsterdam,
and
STL
my
from
STL
Angelica.
from Rome, from the Angelicum.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. And he's a retired professor from the Sacred Heart Major Seminary in Detroit. And
That's right.
yes, thanks for coming on. And please, well, we know what kind of pushed you to write this book, but if you could talk a little bit about the crisis, kind of like the background that motivated you to
Right.
write
Well,
this work.
let me tell you, this volume, Redeeming Reason, The Battle for Faith, Rationality, and Truth, is volume 2 of a 3-volume work. Volume 1, which was published last year, was called Redeeming Sex, The Battle for the Body. And that's already been published by the same publishing house, of course. Volume 2 is about redeeming reason, the battle for faith, rationality, and truth, and that has really 2 parts to it. So part 1 was published recently, and part 2 will come out sometime in the course of this year. And then volume 3 is entitled Redeeming Culture. So I focused on anthropology, as it were, the nature of man, the body, because we live in a culture that denies the significance of the body. And then volume 2 is on reason, rationality, as you said, and its orientation to truth and reality. And then volume 3 is on culture. And all of these essays in these 3 volumes, all of these essays have been published already over a period of 20 some odd years. But I added in each of them, like in volume 1 on redeeming sex, I add a forward and an afterword. And in this volume, Redeeming Reason, in the part 1, I also have a forward and an afterword, just so that people get a sense of, what are all these essays about. Sebastian suggested, we can't publish like 18 essays in one volume, he said.
Right.
So let's do 2 parts to volume 2. And of course, as you rightly say, redeeming reason, because we live in a culture that has undermined reason, undermined rationality, undermined the relationship between rationality and truth and reality, and has reduced the significance of faith to being, just an opinion. I mean, how many people do I talk to who are genuinely, Christians, either Protestants or Catholics, and they think that faith is just a matter of opinion. They don't really see the connection between rationality and truth and reality, that faith is grounded in reality. So the essays in volume 2 that was just published, I'm always engaged ecumenically. I'm a member of, for instance, Evangelicals and Catholics Together, which was an organization that was founded like 25 years ago. I've been a member for probably 15 years. And since my background was in the Reformed tradition, Dutch Neo-Calvinism, I always engage ecumenically in my work. So in in this part one of this volume, the first essay is actually called um, some of the significant thinkers in Dutch Neo-Calvinism. Probably the most significant figure was Abraham Kuyper. And
Mm-hmm.
so I discuss in this first chapter, do you have to be a Calvinist in order to be a Kuyperian? A response from a Roman Catholic Kuyperian. I consider myself in some respects a Kuyperian, but I'm a Roman Catholic. And so I
Right.
try to provide a justification for embracing, the Kuyperian tradition as a Catholic. Um, and
Interesting.
then, as I said, I'm always engaged with these Dutch, the great Herman Bavinck, who was a contemporary of Kuyper. And I use those two terms, which were uh, features of the Second Vatican Council, ressourcement and
Mm-hmm.
aggiornamento, huh? Going back to the authoritative sources of faith and then connecting with contemporary culture. And so I look at, I call it Bavinkian ressourcement and aggiornamento. So again, it's always engaging that thinker, in this instance, Herman Bavinck, who was a great Dutch Reformed theologian of the late 20th century, the late 19th century and the early 20th century. Then I have other chapters.
Mm-hmm.
I have a chapter on fundamental ecclesiology, unity and diversity in the one church, the many churches, a Catholic approach to ecclesial unity and diversity. And then I particularly look at the ecclesiology of Abraham Kuyper. But I'm addressing the question from a Catholic perspective: what about ecclesial unity and diversity? Um, because again, I mean, certainly in the pontificate of, in my view, in the pontificate of Francis, his view and the view of some Catholics comes down to a kind of an ecclesiological relativism, and so
Mm.
you lose the sense of the one church. Yes, there are many. You have to give an account of the role, the place of, let's say, Protestant churches within the one church. I then have a chapter on original sin uh,
Right.
and its implications for evangelization, preterition, and then again these there are these evangelical scholars, the Italian Leonardo the Chirico and this American also. They're Reformed Baptists, so I address the question of the evangelical hermeneutics of Catholicism on the nature grace relationship, because they're very critical of what they understand the nature grace relationship to be in Catholicism.
Right.
Um, and then I have a chapter on Herman Bavinck. He wrote a very great little study on the idea of Christian philosophy, and then revelation and authority, and then I have two chapters that consider the Reform objection to natural theology,
Right.
because they reject natural theology. Um, anyway, so uh, it all has to do with because reason has been corrupted by sin, and so we're trying, but we don't abandon reason. In John Paul II's encyclical Fides et Ratio, in paragraph 21, he talks about how reason needs to be redeemed.
Right. Right.
And so the title of my book, I don't get it from him because this is also a feature of Dutch neo-Calvinism, redeeming reason, and then faith. What's the place of reason in understanding the nature of faith? What about rationality and its relationship to reality? And what about truth? We're realists as far as truth. John Paul II, again, in Fides et Ratio, in paragraphs 81, he talks about, we're epistemic realists because we think we can know reality, the truth about reality, but we're also ontological realists because we think that truth is grounded in reality. Truth, the nature of truth is such that if something is true, it's true because it corresponds to reality. So
Right.
all of that is discussed in this book, but as I say, I'm always engaged ecumenically.
Right. Right.
I mean, obviously, I'm coming out as a Catholic, but I also want to engage with these thinkers uh, in an ecumenical way,
Yeah. And that
so that I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was just going to say that, and that was really makes a Catholic distinct from others, and is able to do true ecumenism because we put reason on its pedestal, and that is accessible to all men. So it
Right,
gives us that opening,
right,
right, to the other men reason,
right, right,
and we're
right.
able to that to smoothen the path to the faith, not cause the faith, but because
No, no,
natural can
right,
cause
right.
supernatural, but smoothen
And
the path.
to give a sense that what do we have in common here? What do we share? How can we engage in a discussion of these issues? Well, like I said, I belong to the ecumenical group, evangelicals and Catholics together, and we're trying to find uh, when we discuss all kinds of topics over the years, everything from uh, liberty to the natural law to the church to culture and so on. We're trying to find what do we have in common here, and where are we
Right.
critical of each other? You see, so it's not kind of like, because a lot of Catholics are sometimes worried about ecumenism. They think it's kind of, you're just abandoning the distinctiveness of the Catholic faith, but that's not really true. You can engage in affirming the truth of the Catholic faith, and yet at the same time, what is it that you can learn from these, in my case here, these reformed Dutch reformed thinkers like Kuyper and Bavinck and Doivit and many others, and yet
Yeah.
at the same time affirm the truth of Catholicism.
No,
That's
yeah, that's right. And dialogue, really, the whole notion of dialogue, you have to presuppose the existence and the belief in reason, because the dialogos, I mean, you're really you're between
exactly,
two person, you're passing the logos. So there is no
exactly.
dialogue without reason. Is there a crisis? Because I think the foundation of your book is really the crisis of the distinction between faith and reason. There's two. Can you
Yes.
talk about the two extremes that you allude to?
Well, yeah,
Either
the two extremes are actually already discussed in Vatican One, 1869, 1870. The one extreme is to be a fideist. And a fideist is someone who diminishes the significance of reason. Um, Faith is just simply, uh, it's not grounded in reason. It's not even grounded in reality. It's just a subjective response. On the other hand, you have the rationalist who thinks that everything that you know is something that is justified through reason. So reason becomes not only a matter of justification, it becomes the source of truth. So you have to find a way between that. Faith, yes, faith. The nature of faith is such that there's a place there for rationality. You can't think about faith because faith is related to beliefs. Faith and beliefs are not the same thing. Beliefs are an inherent part of faith, but belief has to do with those matters that we hold to be true. Okay. Um, Sometimes faith is discussed in such a way that it's purely subjective. Um,
yes, yes,
so Vatican I rejects that understanding of faith, but also rejects the understanding of reason, where reason is taken to be the source of truth, as it were, that which you justifies everything that you know to be the case. No, yes, of course, rationality is important, reason is important. We need to be able to justify the claims that we hold, um, but it's not as if reason is the source of all truth. Um, so yeah, you got to find. The church has always found a way between between fideism
Hmm.
and rationalism. We're neither
Right.
fideists, uh, but we're not rationalists either.
That's right. That's right. So, do you think, because you mentioned, and you mentioned a lot of names before in modern theology, but generally speaking, modern theology seemed to replace reason, truth with kind of experience, this whole subjectivity. Are there good modern, like who is kind of I don't know, a light post, if you will, or who is a guide, we can say, for the modern theologians? You did mention some names, but you're
Well,
rooted in Thomism. But yeah, if you can
right,
expand a little
right.
bit on that.
Look, um, there are theologians. If you think, for instance, of Bernard Lonergan, who was a great, he was a Jesuit. He taught in Rome for many years and then taught at Boston College and even at Harvard Divinity School, he taught. Now, um, in fact, I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine last night about how there are things in Bernard Lonergan, like Bernard Lonergan wrote this great book, very difficult to read. It's like a 700-page book called Insight.
Mm,
Um, and then he wrote many things. You know, there are several volumes, collected essays. He's and also his book Method in Theology. These are things that you can learn from Lonergan, but you also have to be very critical. And one of the things you have to be critical of is that Lonergan sometimes he will sound like an experiential expressivist. Uh,
mm,
this is a term that comes from George Lindbeck in his book, The Nature of Religion, some years ago. An experiential expressivist is somebody who thinks that the content of faith is generated by experience.
hmm.
And that's typical. That's a typical feature of
Modernism.
modernism,
Yeah.
subjectivism. I mean, you can find many people who are not even theologians and who actually are experiential expressivists. They think that the content of faith is just something that's produced by experience. But that's not the case, because the beliefs, we're realists, as I said, about truth, about rationality. And if something is, if we hold a belief to be the case, then that belief is true because what it asserts is in fact the case about objective reality. That's what ultimately what we're interested in. We're interested in grounding our beliefs in objective reality. Now, of course, faith is more than believing, but it's not less than believing. It's not less than believing. So already in Vatican I, the Church, you know, uh, found a way through fideism, which diminishes the significance of rationality and even reality, and rationalism, which elevates reason to a place where it not only justifies claims but is the source of the content of faith.
Right.
Um,
It's interesting how they both kind of converge in a way. Kind of like, the rationalists and the fideists are almost in the end kind of like the same thing, at least have the same consequences.
right,
The
right. That's
subjective
true.
aspect.
That's right. So you have someone like Bernard Lonergan. Uh, I mean, I think again, Bernard Lonergan. There are things to learn, just like there are things to learn from Karl Rahner. I always think you can't just dismiss someone like Rahner or dismiss someone like Lonergan or dismiss someone like Skillebake, but you have to be critical. You have to read these
Right.
thinkers critically,
Right.
because in fact, at the end of the day, I remember once. I don't know if you know who he's dead now, Father Matthew Lamb. Uh,
Yeah,
Father
I've heard
Lamb,
of him.
he used to teach. He wrote his doctoral, his PhD on Lonergan, and but he eventually he sort of abandoned Lonergan, and he taught for many years down there in Florida. What's the name of the
Hmm.
college that was the name of the college there that was founded?
Not Ave Maria, right?
Ave Maria, right? He taught
Ave
at Ave
Maria.
Maria for many years in the School of Theology, and I remember asking him once, Father, why did you stop identifying with Lonergan? And because he said quite simply, because I saw that many of the priests who had read Lonergan's work were actually leaving the priesthood, he said.
Wow. Wow.
So,
That's if I could just say, because you definitely have a Thomistic basis, kind of like reading these other modern authors uncritically or critically, rather critically with that Thomistic basis, you can do it critically. Like without that Thomistic basis, it's kind of impossible to just, dive into these modern authors without scholastic, that with the fine distinctions, with this orthodox teachings. Is that
right,
the
right,
case? Because
right,
we've kind of seeing that.
right. No, you have to be able to do that. Otherwise, you just embrace these thinkers uncritically.
Right,
And
right.
and as I said, it's not that there isn't something to learn from even Ronner. I mean, I think Ronner, volume one of Ronner's theological investigations, where he deals with doctrinal development, is actually quite a rich account of doctrinal development. I've always drawn on that, just like Lonergan's method in theology. Okay, that's a more troublesome work, but his volume on insight. But these are not things that you can just sit down and you know
Right.
you know. Insight is like
Right,
700
it is.
pages.
Yeah,
You know,
absorb totally. You got to
no,
be
no,
able to.
you can't absorb it totally. You have to think about, well, what is he saying here? And the same
Right.
thing with Skillebake. Skillebake wrote a very fine volume on marriage. He wrote many fine things, but he also, in fact, Skillebake at the Second Vatican Council defended Pope Paul VI's account of the Eucharist, where Pope Paul VI is defending a realist view of the Eucharist, that the Eucharist has to do with um, what is it? Yeah, he's defending a realist view of the Eucharist against those thinkers who wanted to turn the Eucharist into a kind of a subjective experience,
Wow,
and
wow.
uh, and so yeah, he again, these are thinkers that at the end of the day, I'm not a Skillabakian or a Ronarian or even a Lonerganian, but there
Right.
are things to learn there,
That's
and
right.
you you
That's
you
right.
can't just dismiss them out of hand.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so, and then the same thing goes for what I've learned from the Reformed tradition of Kuyper and Bavinck and others. You read them critically.
Right.
Um,
Right.
otherwise, what's the point of? I mean, what's the point of reading? Well, I mean, I guess many people say there is no point in reading Ron or Lonergan or they
Yeah.
don't, they
No.
don't, and so they're very dismissive. But I don't think you can be completely dismissive. You have to read them critically. That's that, and that's how I approach things in this book. But here I'm discussing in particular, as I said, Dutch neo-Calvinists. I have a book that came out a couple of years ago called Roman Catholicism and Dutch Neo-Calvinism, where I discuss a lot of these things.
Yeah, but with that, know about
Anyway,
that.
so
Yeah.
yeah,
So
I
no, I was just saying that realist basis. That's the basis that you need. The epistemological realism, the
well, because you want to
metaphysical
get at
realism.
reality. You want to get
That's
at the
right.
truth about reality, and you think, and the nature of faith is such, it consists of beliefs. It's more than beliefs, but it consists of beliefs. And as I said, sometimes people confuse faith and beliefs, and beliefs have to do with those assertions, those things that we assert to be the case about reality.
Right.
And we so as Catholics, uh, we're realists. We think that we can know the truth about reality.
That's right. That's right.
That's what comes out very clearly in John Paul II's, Fides et Ratio. We're realists. We're epistemic realists. We think we can know the truth about reality, and we don't make what we know true. It's reality that makes it true.
It
So,
would sound so simple that, but it's such a subtle anti-realism that it's very pervasive, and
oh,
people don't realize.
no, there's no question. We live in an anti-realist culture. We live in a culture where faith is understood in an anti-realist way, in a subjectivist way, and so people don't. They don't think about when they talk. They may genuinely believe, but they don't really understand that faith has to do with truth, and truth has to do with reality. And if you're a committed Christian, like we just celebrated Easter, well, Easter is grounded in the truth about reality that Christ rose from the dead. That's not a
Yep.
subjective matter. We think that
Right.
that's a matter about reality. About so that's why that's why my book, the subtitle, "The Battle for Faith, Rationality, and Truth," because you can affirm reason and yet not really affirm uh, um, rationality, connected to reality and the nature of truth and all that. So that's all, for me, that's all very important. And so in this volume and in volume two, part two of this volume two, I engage about 16 thinkers that have thought about this as Catholics, but also as Protestants, in particular as neo-Calvinists.
Right.
So
Very good. Let me
that's all very important.
Yeah, no, let me ask you that because you allude to doctrinal development, and it seems like, well, verse just mere change, and it would seem that reason plays a central part in authentic, the Catholic understanding of development of doctrine, and not just a corruption of it. Can you give us that relationship? Why how does reason kind of play its part
Well,
in the doctrinal development?
it plays its part because reason is in doctrinal development. So we're talking about development, so there has to be sort of unity and diversity there in the developments. And so reason is trying to give an account of the development such that there is continuity. In fact, in the chapter where I deal with this, I quote I quote I always like to give a connection with not just with Catholics but with Reform. So I don't know if you know he recently died, Paul Helm, who was
Oh
a
no.
great philosopher, English philosopher,
Hmm.
Calvinist, and he wrote a church semper reformanda. A church always reforming is enjoying both continuity and change. And then there's a quote from another great Dutch reform: integrity and truth, he says, compel the church. Bavinck said, to give an account to those outside the church as candidly as possible, continuity of faith within all the changes of time. This was a common problem that Catholics and Protestants shared as they sought the right way for the church to travel between the times. In all of this, it is no wonder that Bavinck became a model of how theology could be done with commitment to the truth, combined with openness to problems and carefulness to judgments against others. And we understand that this posture had nothing to do with relativism. See, a lot of people
Right.
think that doctrinal development is about relativism, but it's not, because there has to be this underlying continuity in terms of propositions, theological propositions. So we have to distinguish between propositions and how those propositions are expressed and how we understand them. And over time, there's both continuity and development uh, in the in trying to give an account of doctrinal development. So it
And
has
reason
nothing
kind of
to do.
sparse them out. Yeah, no, I'm
Sorry.
sorry. Just reason kind of sparses them out. Reason says this is what changes. This this is what doesn't change. Kind of reason
Right.
is the one dictates that.
Right. Well, what doesn't change are the propositional truths of faith.
Right.
And our understanding of those propositional truths uh, may change in the sense of being developed such that
Right.
it deepens our understanding. It deepens our understanding. Um, so, and as I say, there are a lot of Catholics who are reluctant to talk about doctrinal development because they think doctrinal development is just relativism. But it
Right.
really isn't, because you have these propositional truths of faith and you have the growth in our understanding of those propositions. But that understanding has to maintain a certain continuity with the truths of faith. It can't be such that you've abandoned those truths.
Right,
Um,
right, right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so the pastoral, a lot of people think kind of like the pastoral practice is antithetical to kind of these immutable, the immutability, the rigidity, which is a word very commonly used of even reason, these immutable truths. So really, the pastoral needs that flux, that change, the constant change, in order to just. It's almost like an inductive. It's
right,
almost a crisis of deductive reason. It's just purely inductive. Let's interpret even theology from the bottom up.
right. So if you're talking about pastoral, yeah, to understand the pastoral context is helpful in order to deepen our understanding of the truths of the faith. Um, Now, sometimes, of course, the pastoral context is such that it undermines the way people understand the pastoral context, it undermines the truths of the faith. So we have to always hold on to what is propositionally true. What is the and and for a proposition to be true, as I said earlier, it's true because what it asserts is in fact the case about objective reality. But we can go on to deepen our understanding of those truths such that we can say there's a certain development here in our understanding. It's not a development in the propositions, it's a development in our understanding of those propositions.
Right, right, right. And do you think reason has it contributed to like kind of the total decline of missionary activity? Is reason, the crisis of reason, kind of is it related to that
Well,
crisis of missionary
I would
activity?
say that what has contributed to that is a rationalism, an understanding of reason as rationalistic, such that reason becomes, the source and not only the justification of beliefs, but also the source of beliefs. And so you can that kind of reason leads to the undermining of truth, because people don't make a distinction between truth and justification. Truth and
Mm,
justification, you have to distinguish what is true, what is the source of truth, and how do we justify those beliefs that we hold to be true. Those are
right,
You have to make that distinction. Otherwise, you can collapse truth into just what's being justified. You see, and so
right,
then of course um, we become rationalists. We become relativists about what we claim to know. And in fact, in Fides et Ratio, John Paul identifies relativism as the one source of the undermining of truth. Um, and relativism is simply the view that says that truth is relative to the context, to the individual. So, if you think of the pastoral context as the context that defines the nature of truth, well, then you've already lost the game. It seems to me,
yeah, that's right, that's right.
because you're
Is
not. Go ahead.
no, I'm sorry. Go if you want to finish your.
No, I was going to say if you don't make that, if you don't make the distinction between justification, which is important, we have to be able to justify the beliefs that we hold to be the case, and truth, which has to do with reality. The nature of truth is such that what we hold to be true is true because it conforms to reality. It's justified because it's um, because of the reality. If we lose that, then of course um, truth becomes just something relative to the individual, to the culture, to our understanding. And so to be pastorally oriented sometimes leads to just relativism.
Right, right. Is there? Do you think there's a way you can live it? Maybe in a sense, many in the church have embraced like a practical fide. Can we talk about a practical fideism?
Well, I would avoid using the word fideism because it suggests, that the content of faith is simply defined by your experience.
Right, right.
There is, yes, of course, there's a place, a practical place for for faith, but faith involves beliefs, and beliefs are the sort of things that you hold to be true. You can't think about faith apart from beliefs. And as I said, excuse me, beliefs have to do with, because ultimately faith has to do with reality, but belief has to do with the content of faith.
Right,
and the
right.
con
No,
and the and we can't let faith itself define the content. The content is relative to beliefs. Beliefs are the sort of things that we hold to be true, and we hold them to be true because of reality.
right,
Because of
right.
reality.
But I just meant more in a negative sense because you do hear a lot of preaching, and even by some prelates who are just talking very in a subjective manner. It seems like there is a fideist element there. Maybe again, not
Oh,
in theory, because they want to
no, no.
justify the theoretical framework,
Yeah,
but
yeah. No,
in
that's true.
practice,
That is true. The way they talk about faith is such that they lose all these distinctions. The distinction between faith and beliefs, and that beliefs have to do with the content of faith, and that beliefs are such that they have to do with reality, that they have to be justified. How do you justify your beliefs? Well, there are certain criteria that you use,
mhm,
coherence and the like. It's also, you can have a place for experience, but ultimately you're interested in reality. You want to know the truth about reality, and
right,
so and that has to do with the nature of truth. Truth is such that what you hold to be the case is true because it conforms to reality. And so the assumption is, excuse me, I used to tell my students, John Paul, what he's asserting here is assumes that we can know the truth about reality. The resurrection that we celebrated yesterday tells us the truth about reality, about life after death and so on.
mhm,
These are not just subjective matters.
right,
If you know that Christ rose from the dead, then you know something about the truth about reality, about resurrection, about life after death. You see, I say to people, if the resurrection is true, then we know that there's life after death because Christ died and rose from the dead.
that's right,
So
that's right.
all those things
Yeah,
are
it's
crucial.
interesting. Because even relativism has not only affected the Catholics, but even outside of religion. I mean, outside of our religion, you see others from man-made religions that kind of have this view too, which I found very fascinating. Oh, you have your religion, I have mine. You have your God,
Well,
I have mine.
well,
And
that's
I've heard
right.
that a lot from Muslims, Hindus, and
Oh yeah, of
I'm
course,
shocked.
of course. No,
And
that's
it's
again, that's because they've subjectivized. They've made faith a matter of subjectivity. So they don't distinguish between faith and beliefs, and then they don't understand the nature of beliefs. That beliefs are such that for a belief to be true, it's true because it brings us into contact with reality. A proposition is going to be true if what that proposition asserts is in fact. You meet people, even people that are seriously Christian, or at least if you ask them, they say that they're Christian. They have a subjectivist view of faith.
right.
They
Very
don't
interesting.
really see the connection between faith, rationality, and truth, as the subtitle of my book indicates. Huh? So
Right, right.
we have to understand faith involves beliefs, and beliefs are the sort of things that are either true or false. If we think that the resurrection, for instance, is true, it's we also think. I mean, historically, I mean, there have been Christians who've tried to provide a justification of the resurrection. I don't know if you ever read William Lane Craig, who's a Protestant, evangelical philosopher, but he's written and has debated countless people over the resurrection.
That's right.
providing a justification for the historicity of the resurrection.
That's right.
Uh, so that again. That has to do with uh, justification, rationality, and also because we think that the resurrection is the truth about reality.
Right.
So
Right.
all of those things are connected with each other. Otherwise, we lose a sense of what you know what the Christian faith is.
That's right. That's right. And there's no communication. There is no dialogue without. There's no arriving at the truth without the affirmation of reason.
Well,
Now, I
that's
just want to
right.
ask you, kind of, and kind of closing up here,
Yes.
is Saint Thomas? You think can we deviate from Saint Thomas? Saint Thomas, is there grave error in just being, for example, I'm an Augustinian, and that's I don't really consider Saint Thomas, or I am a what have you, Benedictine. I don't consider the school
Look,
St. Thomas.
my example always is that John Paul II, uh, he was a Thomist, but he also wrote many things he learned from, phenomenologists.
That's
So
right.
you can you yes, no question, you can learn from Thomas. You can learn from Thomas. You can also say Thomas, needed to express this more fully. But on the other hand, there, you can learn from Max Shaler as John Paul II did, from Husserl, as Monsignor, what's his name, from Catholic University of America. He used to teach. I think he's retired now. So
Mhm.
I would not say that everything that you want to know philosophically is found in Thomas,
Right.
or at least is expressed by Thomas. Now, I don't think there's anything that you can say, wow, Thomas was so wrong about this, that why do we read him? No, we can deepen our understanding of the Catholic faith, of the Christian faith, of the nature of faith, rationality, and truth by studying Thomas. But there are also other thinkers
Right. Right.
that can help you, both in the Catholic tradition as well as, I argue, as well as in the Protestants, Dutch neo Calvinists, for instance.
Right. Right.
You have to be, I mean, all these things, you have to be critical. You have to be able to discern.
That's right. That's right.
And
Well, actually, this book, I mean, when I first got it, it was I was shocked to see when you have a book this thick and it's one volume. That's a great sign. So I was like, volume part one, part one,
and
part
it's
one,
only part one. Part
and it's
two,
only
I'm
part one.
working on part two, which only means, I mean, all the essays have been published in part, have been previously published, but I'm working on the forward and the afterward.
Okay, yeah, Dr. Mahfoud said they're just they're coming out really soon. So I want to give
Yes.
you the last word on this. Any
Well,
exhortation to the audience.
my last word is that we as Christians have to take seriously what the nature of faith is and how it involves beliefs, and beliefs are the source of things that we hold to be true. And so it involves rationality because we want to be able to provide a justification for our beliefs. We can't just say, well, that's what I believe. Yes, of course, that's what you believe, but what kind of justification? You believe in the resurrection of Christ, but what kind of, if someone says to you, you don't really believe that Christ rose from the dead, do you? So you have to be able to provide a justification for that because we're interested in the truth about reality. Faith
That's
and
right.
reality are connected. Faith and
That's
reality
right.
are connected. We can't abandon reality. We can't just think, diminish the significance of reality. So, but we have to also understand that reason has to be redeemed because,
Mm,
as John Paul II said, actually, I say this in the back of my book, just saying, redeeming reason shows how faith and rational inquiry belong together, challenging secular autonomy and fideism. So we have to defend a realist view of truth. We have to also acknowledge that sin had what is called noetic effects. It's affected reason and rationality, and so that's why in the end, for reason to be properly ordered to the truth, it has to also be redeemed. It has to be properly directed. Uh,
Amen.
Amen. And we like I said, we too often forget that.
That's
Uh,
right. That's right. Well, guys, the link is in the description for the book. Get the book. It is impressive volume, and part two is coming out. Hopefully, we'll have you on in a near future
yes.
episode, and it'll be great. Yeah, we'll discuss your part two of the reason. All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr.
Thank,
Chevedia,
thank
and
you very
God
much.
bless you for coming.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure. Thanks very much, man.
Great.